Advent is a season of preparation. We know that. For many of us, it looks like decorating and shopping, sending Christmas cards, baking. All of these things are traditions that can bring joy and can create stress, or even trap us into unreal expectations of what this time should be and look like. It can be disappointing and disorienting when our expectation of what should be doesn't match reality that we live. The same might be said of biblical characters that are part of the stories we expect to hear this time of year. There's Zechariah and Elizabeth, Mary and Joseph, the shepherds, and later the Magi. John the Baptist is there too, though we normally encounter him by the Jordan River, crying out, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord." The Advent settings that are familiar to us include an inn and a manger, Bethlehem, a nearby field. Other settings, other stories might feel out of place. So what do we do with an Advent text that at first glance might not seem to offer a lot of hope or good news? Today's scriptures, especially the gospel lesson, is not a story about Jesus as an infant or even prophesying about his arrival. He's already preaching, teaching, healing, telling others about God's reign. And John is no longer at the river and calling for people to repent and baptizing them. Instead, he's imprisoned, held captive for daring to call out King Herod after he married his own sister-in-law. It would have been understandable if John were focused on what was happening to him in that moment, wondering, would he be released? Would justice be served? Instead, as we hear, he wanted to know if Jesus was truly the one that he and others had been waiting for. Was there reason to hope in the present? Or did they need to keep holding out for something yet to come? In our time, we might ask similar questions. While we hold on to the promise and reality of Christ's birth and presence among us, there is a lot that we're experiencing that seems uncertain or troubling. We see so many wrongs, so much suffering in the world, so much needless pain. And what can we do about it? Even when we try to get involved to do our part, it is reasonable to wonder if our efforts make a difference. In this season of wonder, it can also be a time of great despair. There's uncertainty, even when we are safe in our lives. But John was seeing and seeking something beyond his present circumstances. Through his disciples, he reached out to Jesus, and Jesus responded, quoting from Isaiah 61. It is a vision of hope. These things that you heard name, the blind seeing, the deaf hear, good news. It's a vision of hope, not just for one person, but for all peoples. God promises deliverance, restoration for the lost. In the devotional materials from A Sanctified Art, one of the pieces of artwork shows an image of John the Baptist in prison with dancing light and symbols to represent all that Jesus includes from Isaiah's prophecy, as you can see. And in the accompanying description artist Lauren Wright Pittman says the following: I imagine John, even for a moment, breaking into a bit of laughter at the magnitude of Jesus' ministry. Jesus was quite literally doing the unimaginable. He was removing barriers so the marginalized were no longer reduced to begging and sitting on mats, shoved to the edges of society. All of that was happening beyond what John could see, but he could envision it and take comfort in it. We might not expect laughter or even the faintest bit of a smile in prison, and yet hope makes it possible. I encourage you to read the rest of the artist's statement in the devotional if you haven't. John's unfair imprisonment reminds me of Anthony Ray Hinton's story told in The Sun Does Shine. In 1985, he was arrested and charged in his home state of Alabama with 2 counts of murder, even though he was nowhere near where the murder took place. Sentenced to death, caught in a system that offered no justice to him as a poor black man, he spent 27 years on death row, trying to hold on to hope. And he wrote, initially he wanted nothing to do with God. God had disappointed him. Faith seemed pointless in the face of such oppressive injustice. But he found a way of coping by imagining a different world from what he saw in prison walls. He envisioned a life where he dined and associated with people he never would have known in real life. And he began to seek meaning in faith and to search for something beyond what he was experiencing. He wrote, hope can be a 4-letter word. It can tease a man by staying close but just out of reach. I had hope. I had lots of hope, but I was impatient at times. My life was passing me by quickly, and every year I grieved for the year I lost. Trying to imagine 27 years of hope and hope dashed. Year after year, he waited, afraid he wouldn't survive his imprisonment. He became increasingly disconnected from his loved ones, and on multiple occasions, those he had grown close to were killed. And thanks to the help from Brian Stevenson, lawyer, and the Equal Justice Initiative, he was eventually exonerated and freed. God was at work there. On the day he regained his freedom, he looked at the people who had gathered and the cameras that were focused on him, recording this moment, and he wrote, I had lived in a place where the sun refused to shine. Not anymore, not ever again. The sun does shine, I said, and repeated it. And then the tears began to fall. Anthony Ray Hinton's story ends with his release, but he still felt the effects of long imprisonment when he was freed. It took a long time to adjust to being able to live beyond the confines of prison walls. And it's a testament to his resilience that he was able to survive his imprisonment, though fears remained with him long afterward, especially the dreadful possibility that it could happen again. There are some losses that cannot be regained. The book of Isaiah covers a range of times when people faced exile, lived in captivity, and returned from exile. The prophet called Isaiah called Israel out for turning away from God and righteousness. And yet the prophet also encourages Israel to not fear. God has not forgotten them. Those who thirst will receive water, and new life will spring forth. God continues to work toward justice, and so do those who dare to believe that light that is nearly extinguished can still shine, The human spirit with hope is amazingly creative. I'm a fan of the Moth Radio Hour on NPR. For those who are unfamiliar with it, it consists of stories told by a great diversity of people in the U.S. and abroad. Episodes are generally arranged by a theme, and there are usually 3 or 4 tellers, all of whom tell stories from memory of things that they've personally experienced. Some are funny, some are poignant. All of them have a spark of humanity that runs through the story. Recently, I heard a story that had been shared more than a year ago, the life told by Sunny Jacobs. She and her partner, Jessie, were on a trip in Florida, along with her children, a 9-year-old son, a 10-month-old daughter who was still nursing. Somehow they got caught up in another's crime, and they were arrested for killing 2 police officers. Knowing that they were innocent, trusting that they would be cleared in due time, they made arrangements for Sunny's parents to take care of the 2 children. But things weren't resolved. They were not only sent to trial, they were convicted, sentenced to death in separate facilities. There was no women's death row in Florida at that time, and so Sunny was kept away from the rest of the population in constant isolation, in solitary confinement. Fear and anger, feelings of being despair, of no hope, flooded her thoughts as she faced a future in which her life was uncertain, where even trying to think about the next day beyond what she was experiencing was so far from her reality. Her only respites were twice-weekly trips to the shower and a couple of books in her cell, one a law book and the other a Bible. She turned to the Bible as a source of wisdom, and she began to run across passages that told her that others couldn't determine the meaning of her life. They might be able to determine the length, but not what it meant. What happened inside of her was up to her, not others. And she began to do meditation and daily prayer, sending her energy and love to her children whom she could not see. Later, she was transferred to another cell that had a little bit more interaction and offered a window from which she could see the world, or at least a little piece of it. Apart from her children, Sunny found a way to nurture life. She described a salad that was brought that not only didn't have a tomato, but only had the seed of a tomato in it. But she decided a seed is a garden. And so she got a container from medication and was able to get a little bit of soil from the times that she went outside, and she planted that seed in this medicine cup with some soil and was able to water it and put it in the window where it could get light, and gloriously a tomato plant formed, grew, developed. She said, "I was able to bring life to death row." It made her feel good to have something to nurture. The seedling grew until it was strong enough to plant outside her window, believing that it could be free even if she wasn't. The guard allowed her to go out. And when the plant grew a tomato, the guard allowed her to bring it inside, and she tasted it. It was never a greater tomato. And of course, she saved the seeds from it and planted more. And so soon she had a garden growing outside her prison cell. But there was another inmate, one who wanted what others had. And if she couldn't have it, she was determined to prevent someone else's joy. And she appeared outside of Sunny's window one day with a bucket. And one by one, she plucked out every single one of those tomato plants. Sunny screamed and cried, but there was no way to stop the destruction. And in the process, all of these other losses came back to her. And so with nothing else to call her own, she went back to meditation and yoga and prayer, returning to the internal work that had kept her going. It took 17 years. But like Anthony Ray Hinton, she was eventually released. And in freedom, she taught yoga, spoke out against the death penalty, and planted tomatoes. She died earlier this year, and I hope her family acknowledged her desire that when she died, she wanted tomatoes planted on her grave. In life, in prison and beyond, she embodied compassion that transformed her anguish and anger. Anthony Ray Hinton and Sonny Jacobs experienced release from their captivity. In this, their story differs from John the Baptist. As Lauren Wright Pittman notes in her artwork and reflection, in the wonders Jesus names in Matthew 11, quoting again from Isaiah 61, he doesn't include release of the captives. The birds and the open cage and John's clothing is representative of the one part of dancing spirit that is not present in this. And there's suspicion that perhaps John recognized this absence and might have known that he was not going to survive this prison. He would not experience freedom of body. And yet hope doesn't always mean release from what is physical. Even for Sonny, who was exonerated, it didn't come in time to save her partner, Jesse. He was put to death 2 years earlier. It would have been understandable for her to hold on to bitterness, but she held on to hope, just as John did. She used her work to nurture life. Like Anthony Ray Hinton, while in prison, freedom comes in acknowledging that others cannot take away thoughts or dreams. Most of us have not, will not experience the confinement of a prison cell. Not all stories of those who are imprisoned are those who are innocent of all crimes. And yet there are many of us who are imprisoned in other ways, stuck in unhealthy patterns, marginalized, without visible ways of creating a new reality. We may feel trapped in relationships or jobs, thinking that drains us or seems impossible to break through or beyond. Maybe you long for something new but don't know where to begin. Fear and exhaustion can trap us as much as bars in a cell. And we all need something to keep hope. When hope is gone, it is extremely hard to even begin to think about peace or justice. I invite you to consider in what ways you might have felt imprisoned at some point in your life, or maybe now. Where do you long for freedom? And in those places, hope allows us to begin to believe that something can grow when it is just a seed. It finds root in trust that Jesus' words spoken long ago are still true, and that God is continuing to work in and among us, and that we have important work to do wherever we are. Even when our vision is limited by a narrow window, can we dare to believe that the sun will shine, water will continue to quench parched spirits and lands, and that we as a people in community will continue to work for justice? We might not see it in our lifetimes. John didn't live to see the fulfillment of all he dreamed, but he pointed the way to God's reign at hand. John's story of imprisonment doesn't fit our typical stories of Advent and Christmas, You're not likely to see a holiday feel-good special about it. But his question and Jesus' response planted a seed of hope that can live in us and still guide us. In this hemisphere, this isn't the time when we typically think about planning our growth, Naomi's rose notwithstanding. But in our preparation for this season, can we begin to see, can we dare to envision what God is doing in our midst and find faith to join in it? We are freed from paralyzing fear to be messengers of God's love and shalom. We do what is right because it is the right thing to do, even if others don't follow. And we hope, because in that hope we find life. In our homes, on the streets, in our words and our actions, let us live as bearers of Christ's light and tenders of good news. May it be so.